but I encourage you to take the long-term view of how do you want to leave this planet? And, we're fortunate to have these weird human lives right now. And we actually have this proof of concept of things, steps we can do to make the world a better place. So why wouldn't you try it?
This is Running for Real, the podcast for runners who know that for every runner's high, there are just as many lows. All those just missed PRs, easy runs that feel hard, injury blues, and more. Each week, we'll talk to running, health, and wellness experts about their highs, lows, and best advice to build our confidence. Running for Real is about being honest, being brave, and most of all, not feeling alone. And now here's our host, Tina Muir.
Hello, my friends. Welcome to episode 129 of the Running for Real podcast. Thank you so much for being here today. This is a special one to me, so I'm really excited you are here. Thank you for joining me. Last week, we had Peter Sagal on the show, the host of Wait, Don't Tell Me. And he was just wonderful. He was funny. He was, obviously I mentioned how much his running career had meant to him, and it was just really special to hear that. He's probably one of the most famous people I've had on the show, so I was pretty excited about that, and he did not disappoint. So if you did miss that one, be sure to go back and check it out. Now today, this is an episode I've been thinking about for a long time, and as you will soon hear, and you'll probably experience for yourself, once you start thinking about this, it starts to overtake your thoughts, and you can't stop thinking about it, and everything you do, you analyze. Now, I knew it had to be this lady, as she's making real waves in the running community, and not just for things like, winning Leadville or the CCC 100K and many more. She was also named the 4th female ultrarunner of the year 2017 by Ultra Running magazine, and she's sponsored by The Dream, which is Patagonia. I want to share some stats with you before we begin from a podcast with Davis Wallace-Wells and Joe Rogan. And I recommend you listen to it. Claire and I do talk about this in the episode. Not so much a Joe Rogan fan in general, but this one is just a really powerful one. And someone did fact check this information. So what I'm giving you is the factual stats from that podcast, although some of them were slightly tweaked, but this is actually the correct number. So how much electricity do American homes waste? 65%. How much food does the US waste? 31%. If all the glacial ice melted, how much would sea levels rise? 80 meters, which is 240 feet. The climate change since 1950 has been 400,000 years worth of climate change. Methane is at least 30% more damaging as a greenhouse gas than CO2. It is actually 25 times more damaging over 100 years. The next one was feeding cows seaweed can reduce methane, and it can by 50 to 60%, which is pretty crazy. Wildfire smoke decreases cognitive abilities by 5% in a general cognition test, but 11.8% less object recall. That's pretty crazy just from smoke, and with the amount there's going to be more of it coming. Those stats are kind of scary, right? And you're going to hear more about it, and we're going to go meet this wonderful woman, Clare Gallagher. But first, I want to send a huge thank you out to UCAN, MetPro, and Tribe. So let's go meet Clare. Thank you to Generation UCAN for supporting this episode of the Running for Real podcast. Now, today we're talking about the environment, and taking powder during marathon training instead of gel packets, that really adds up. So you can reuse your bottle, just put a scoop of Generation UCAN, and there's plenty of servings in that tub. You can put that bottle in your shorts, especially if you get those Saucony bullet shorts that I'm always talking about. And those who thought they were gone, they are back around, so you can get yourself a pair. I just mix it up the night before. It's ready in the morning. I can slip it in my pocket for long runs. You can slip it in your pocket during races, or you can drink it up just before you go. Some people like to take it just before, as I just mentioned there. Some people like taking it during the races. Some people like taking both before and during. I have tried all three, and my personal choice is I actually have a Generation UCAN peanut butter bar with a superhero muffin. And then I have 2 scoops of the powder mixed into some water throughout a marathon. And I also make sure I take that just before a water station so I can grab a cup of water afterwards to kind of drink it down and just get that hydration in as well. And it's not just me. There are plenty of other elites like Meb, Dathan Ritzenhein, Alexi Pappas that use it, but also many other listeners love it. And even if you have to carry it like I did in Boston, you are going to love it. And many people have found it as the only product that doesn't upset their stomach. So use code TinaMuir25 to get yourself 25% off, even if you've already used Generation UCAN and purchased it before. So you can visit tinamuir.com/UCAN. That's tinamuir.com/UCAN and use code TinaMuir25 for 25% off. Claire, thank you so much for joining me today on the Running For Real podcast. I say this every time that I'm excited, but I am really excited to talk to you today. This is something I've been dying to cover, and I just want to thank you for being here today. So I'm looking forward to this.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, this is going to be great. And I was so excited when I interviewed your coaches, Megan and David Roche. And they mentioned you in that interview about things that you were doing for good. And immediately, I'd already had your name down on my list. But once I was like, right, I got the connection now. I can get her. And I was so excited that we've been able to make this work because your schedule is insanely busy, which is a good thing. But I want to begin by talking about, you kind of were thrown into the limelight when you won Leadville. And, this is a very prestigious race, especially in the ultra and trail world. But I think across the board, most people know of it. But let's first go from kind of being a relative unknown to suddenly being thrown into the limelight, being featured in big publications, your name out there. Was any part of that overwhelming for you?
Honestly, not too much. I try not to look too much into media. I mean, it was all very positive too. Like, you win a race and then people talk about it. It seemed like, I guess, somewhat normal in a way. It was all very flattering, but yeah. And then I guess what was overwhelming was the fact that I sort of overhauled my whole life after winning Leadville by choosing to do trail running or try to do it full time.
Mm-hmm. And was that an instant thing? You kind of decided that immediately when you won that race, or was it kind of a few weeks later?
It was definitely over the course of the fall because Leadville happens end of August. And when I started getting sort of sponsor opportunities, then it made sense. I was like, oh, I could, take a stab at this. Mm-hmm. Like super hardcore dirtbag lifestyle.
And, I think that's pretty typical of most runners, particularly in the trail and ultra world where it's kind of a bit of an unknown and maybe becoming more so now. But it's been really cool to see what you've done with that publicity. Now, just a few more things about your own running. You ran for Princeton, but even at that point when you were in college, did you have a feeling that longer distances would kind of be where you would end up?
No, not at all. I've always had, when you ask the question, like in 5th grade, what do you want to be when you grow up? I've always said some version of an athlete. Weirdly enough, I originally wanted to be an Olympic swimmer. Mm-hmm. Didn't quite work out. So in a way in college, it was this weird dichotomy of like, I was seeing my mortality in running because I didn't really have that great of a collegiate career. Yet I knew I still had some things unfinished athletically. And that's when I sort of dove into really like trying to learn more about mountains. So like in college, I studied different forms of Buddhism, and that I, would sort of jerry-rig research papers so that I could read about the Himalayas, like under the guise of religion. And then, I remember there were like the last 2 years of college, I just was like reading nonstop, like mountaineering books and things, which is funny because then, trail running is the intersection of like being a collegiate runner and being obsessed with the mountains in a way. So yeah. Little did I know. I mean, it's all easier to say in hindsight.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the case. Most things, isn't it? And what about the environment? Was that always something you were interested in?
Yes, 100%. So when I originally started thinking I wanted to go to med school in college. I was just taking standard like biology classes and whatnot. But then I really started to hone in on climate change studies. And it was through a fluke internship that I started studying coral reefs. And that was actually my focus for 4 years, pretty intensely. I spent 2 summers pretty much entirely underwater.
And where was that?
One summer was in Bermuda, so in the Atlantic, and then another was in this really tiny island nation called Palau, which is in the Pacific, kind of near the Philippines. And that is what like hit me in the face like a brick. The reality of climate change hitting our oceans.
How did that kind of come about? You say hitting you in the face. What do you mean by that?
It's like what's happening to our oceans is absolutely catastrophic. It's mind blowing. And to see people who live in these like, Pacific Island nations like Palau or Fiji or, the Marshall Islands or any of them. I befriended lots of people during that time and they're not contributing to climate change. Like their carbon footprints are way lower than the average person in America or in Europe. And they're the ones who are seeing declining fish populations, sea level rise into their homes, literally into their living rooms. I had one friend named Arias in Palau, and he's like, yeah, I mean, I'm going to have to move in like 10 years and then another 10 years just because of sea level rise. So that sort of hit me as like this really basic, like this is really unfair. Like, why should so many people of the world who aren't contributing to this problem have to pay for it?
Mm-hmm. Are they aware of it being kind of us doing it, or do they just kind of think it's part of life?
Oh, 100%. They're aware. I mean, yeah, even if you don't have to have, a high school education even to know that the average carbon footprint of an American is the highest. And I mean, even kids in these island nations are aware of climate change and how honestly it's not their country's fault or their leaders' fault. How in depth people know who's at fault, like the specific oil companies and things. I can't say for certain, but I have so much respect for people living in coastal nations who are just chugging along. A lot of people can't afford to move, and why would you want to relocate? So the whole point being, studying coral reefs, like it honestly made me pretty depressed, and I felt like I couldn't really do much. So I decided not to continue my studies in that. And then I taught English for a few years in Thailand.
Was that you kind of trying to essentially like it was too much for you to deal with, so you kind of were just trying to ignore it for a few years?
For sure. And then, of course, I was living on a beach in Thailand, and it just was even more apparent then, like the climate impacts, because I was still diving and traveling extensively through pretty impoverished areas in Southeast Asia. And so, that's when I was like, oh, maybe I want to go to med school, because I saw the benefits of how important like healthcare in rural places is. But that flopped because I have no capacity to do organic chemistry. And then when I won Leadville, it was like, oh, if I can spend a lot of time in the mountains and keep winning races, maybe I can return to my desire to, talk about climate change and possibly do something.
So that was kind of a conscious choice. Once you had this platform that suddenly exploded and people were following you, you kind of thought, oh, wow, I really can make a difference here. It wasn't that you just kind of were fumbling around thinking, what can I talk about now? This was something you suddenly saw an opportunity.
Yes, 100%. When I was 18, like I knew this was the thing I care about most, from like starting or working on the divestment campaign at Princeton to get, the Princeton endowment to divest from fossil fuels, which hasn't happened yet. But, I stopped eating meat when I was 18. So it was almost 10 years ago. And I grew up living pretty like close to the land, even though it was in suburban Denver. My parents are just pretty crunchy. And it didn't come out of left field for sure. Okay. And I think with the onslaught of what is climate change, what's happened in the past 10 years, which is like nothing, right? It's just gotten worse and worse. Mm-hmm. I don't know how we can't be talking about it.
Thank you to MetPro for sponsoring this episode of the Running for Real podcast. MetPro is a world-renowned concierge nutrition, fitness, and lifestyle coaching company. Using metabolic profiling, MetPro's team of experts will analyze your metabolism and provide an individualized approach to obtaining your goals. You seemed to enjoy the episode with Angelo, the founder, a few weeks ago. We learned about our metabolism and why it doesn't seem fair that two people can be eating the exact same thing, exercising the same, yet one changes weight and one doesn't. He explained why that is the case and how he approaches it to get every individual at their best place. MetPro is a proven platform to help athletes and those looking to change their bodies to reduce body weight, increase power, or run better. You're going to be able to maintain your energy better and perform better. It's something really important to us as runners. Many of you find that you're frustrated with my kind of method of eat what you want when you want. Because of that reason I mentioned above, it doesn't seem to work for everyone. We're all different and this can really help. For those of you who already tried it, you said it was an absolute game changer for you. And for the first time ever, you're feeling really good about where you're at, which I love hearing. Many athletes spend hours training every day, but they struggle when it comes to nutrition. So if you can get your nutrition right, you can take your performance to the next level. You can get a free 30-minute consultation with a MetPro expert by visiting metpro.co.tina. That's metpro.co.tina for a 30-minute consultation. What do you have to lose?
I grew up living pretty close to the land, even though it was in suburban Denver. My parents are just pretty crunchy, and it didn't come out of left field for sure. Okay. And I think with the onslaught of what is climate change, what's happened in the past 10 years, which is like nothing, right? It's just gotten worse and worse. Mm-hmm. I don't know how we can't be talking about it.
And to be honest with you, Claire, and I hope I don't offend anyone listening to this, but when people talk about, sponsor my charity or raise money for this or raise money for that, I totally empathize. There's obviously things that are important to you, and we all have those things. But to me, when I think about either raising money or making a difference or doing something, in my head, I'm like, how can it not be the environment? Because yes, okay, there's certain sicknesses and things that affect people and their lives, but without us fixing this world we're in, there is no life for anyone. So I'm for me, I can't compute that, because whenever people, I've had people come up to me and say, companies, and say, we want to work with you. We want to take you to this. I don't want to say it in case I end up doing this in the future. Take you to this location to raise money for a charity. What would you like it to be? And I'm like, the environment. That's basically the only thing that can occupy my mind, because I just can't compute how there could be anything else that could be more important than looking after this world that we live in. So that's why I wanted to dive into this today. And, it's interesting to hear you say that being in it was what kind of did it for you. I remember being in school and learning in geography that I can't remember what country it was. I want to say it was either Norway, Switzerland, somewhere like that. They were struggling with acid rain and they couldn't figure out where it was coming from. It was burning through clothes that were outside, and people were getting really sick, and all the trees were dying. And it turned out it was Great Britain's pollution that had chugged its way over and made a very dangerous climate. And that was a moment for me that I was like, wow, other people can affect other people in other countries, kind of similar to what you said. And that was a real game changer moment for me. But for someone listening who's thinking, okay, you're talking about climate change, it's very hard for us to compute this, because it's not a case of we do these things and tomorrow everything is better, or we don't do these things and tomorrow everything is going to be gone. This is a case of things that the decisions we're making now are affecting things in the next 50, 100, 200 years, if we even make it much beyond that. which I'm not so sure we will. How can you get it across to someone listening who is, I see the environment is important. How would you best like to pitch it to people who really don't think about it in their day-to-day lives? How serious is this issue?
Well, I would ask people to transcend the short-term view. So transcend the day-to-day and really zoom out. And everyone's capable of this. And it's actually a pretty fun and terrifying exercise to think about this tiny little planet that we live on 200 years from now. What does it look like? And do you want your future family members and friends to be living in an apocalyptic world, or a world full of way more suffering than there even is today? And there's already a ton of suffering today from climate change impacts. That's a pretty basic moral question. Like, what do you want our future species and our home to look like? And do you want it to be inhabitable? So that sounds so big. And then we can zoom back in and look at, okay, climate change is a really slow burning, insidious thing. And frankly, you or I, Tina, like not taking a flight isn't really going to do much. We need systematic government change from especially the U.S. government being the largest per capita emitter of carbon. So that's where I hate that it has to come down to politics and government, but that's the reality. And we should honestly be excited about that, because that's something we can all do. And it's not rocket science to vote for people who are smart, which is hopefully what will happen in 2020. Like, we literally just need to elect people who understand basic 7th grade chemistry, which is not the case right now. Instead, in the US, we have wildly corrupt people, and maybe they do understand basic chemistry and climate science, but they're so corrupt and greedy that they're willing to put truly the fate of humanity at risk.
So when you say about them being corrupt, and, for someone listening who's not sure what you're talking about, well, let's take it in two directions. For someone who has no idea what you're talking about, they're so corrupt. There's so much going on. You mentioned fossil fuel companies earlier. What is, what is going on?
Yeah. So, okay, specific to the U.S., since Trump's been president, he has the job of appointing heads to departments. So we have the Department of Interior, Department of Agriculture. Those are the two big ones. And then the Environmental Protection Agency. And he handpicks people who lead those agencies that control how we emit carbon and control our public lands and things. And the people he's appointed have been really like found out to just be wildly corrupt humans. Currently, the head of the Department of Interior is David Bernhardt. He has been known to lobby for endless amount of mines, one being on the Boundary Waters right now, one being south of Tucson, really, really big mining projects, taking in money while he's been in public office, earning millions and millions of dollars for these projects, for mining companies that aren't even based in the U.S. And really, his job description is to take care of the interior of the U.S. And he's basically is known as a crony for mining companies. So if that's not corruption to you, that someone who's tasked with taking care of our land is doing that, then I guess we'd have to back up even further.
Okay, and then let's kind of go the other way of people saying, well, what's the point? How am I going to make a difference? How's my one vote going to make a difference when there's certain people who are never going to change their mind? You say about education, but there's certain people that are never going to get that education or care to get the education to understand what is happening here. So what about people who say, well, it's hopeless?
Well, I just ask them to zoom out again. If that's the way we want to spend our time on Earth, just thinking it's hopeless, then that's your choice. I can't, have make someone be more altruistic. But I encourage you to take the long-term view of like, how do you want to leave this planet? And, we're fortunate to have these weird human lives right now. And we actually have this proof of concept of things, steps we can do to make the world a better place. So why wouldn't you try it? Mm-hmm. Why wouldn't you have conversations with your friends and family about who they're voting for? Like, I mean, if people can't have those conversations, then what are we doing?
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, I actually personally can't vote here. So,
right.
So I'm in a bit of a...
London has some of the worst air pollution in the world. So, back home for you, it's the same story. And I've been inspired actually with the activism coming out of the UK.
Yeah, I was going to say, I definitely feel like at least the UK is definitely making an effort. Yes. And even within, I've mentioned this many times, but I don't know if I've ever said it on the podcast about, obviously the number one thing to do is reduce your usage of things, reduce the things that you're taking in, and then, reuse and recycle is third in line. But the recycling aspect of Great Britain, I'm sure you've seen it, is light years ahead of over here. You have to sort your recycling. Yeah. You get fined if you don't. And it's sorted into 5 different bins. You're not allowed to throw any food waste into the trash. It has to go in a compostable bin with compostable bags. So, yeah, I feel like Great Britain is coming along, but that's why I feel it's my kind of duty over here to get the word out over here as well. And kind of, like we said, make some changes where we can. Okay, so for runners, let's talk about running just for a little bit, and then maybe we'll kind of go more of a general topic again. Mm-hmm. What would you like runners listening to know about looking after this world that we live in? Is there some things that you see runners typically doing often that aren't helping us? Now, we've mentioned flights. Obviously, reducing your flights to a minimum is going to help. But what else? Because, there's got to be other things.
Yeah. So from an individual standpoint, diet is a big thing. Not eating meat is one of the easiest things we can do, especially beef or cow products. So it's also like fun and exciting to be a vegetarian, I think. But again, the biggest thing, and this is, I can go into trail impacts, like, on an actual run, but the biggest thing we can be doing is contributing to the climate change solution. So that is educating ourselves of what our state is doing, what our government is doing. And I personally feel really strongly that Protect Our Winners, it's a nonprofit that works all over the country and actually in different countries around the world, tries to elect climate champions. So people in office of any political party who will care about the climate. Following things like POW and donating to POW is...
What is that?
Protect Our Winners. So this org they're the ones who are getting at the very root cause of the solution. And there are many other climate change organizations out there. This is one I feel strongly about because I see how they work day to day, and I see they run on a shoestring operation and are really making change by focusing on specific bills in specific states. Like Oregon has a carbon tax right now, and they've been lobbying, and they use professional athletes. So that's what's like kind of cool about it. They use, Olympic snowboarders and trail runners like myself to go and talk to legislators about climate policies. And that's been proven to be more effective just from like the excitement factor of like, oh, we have this like 100-mile runner talking to me about forest fires in Colorado. Like, that's pretty cool. So it's a really effective model. So, to any listener, I'm guessing maybe you have never heard of Protect Our Winners. So it's like, Google it and follow them on social media and, put more actual education into everything you're consuming every day. Because I think the more I read and the more I try and learn, it's the more serious this issue is to me. Because, if we were to know close to everything, then we'd be like actually the most depressed and needing to act. And I think we can lull ourselves into complacency by just, I had a great run today. It was beautiful weather. Like, my life is so good. I love running. I'm so fortunate. A lot of people just end it at that. Or maybe they'll say, I do trail work every once in a while. I don't litter. I dig holes when I poop outside, etc. But we need to be taking it to that next step of, okay, who's representing me in this crazy government, and how am I being a part of that?
Thank you to Tribe for supporting this episode of the Running for Real podcast. I felt Tribe matched really well with what we're talking about today, with the environment, just kind of caring about this world that we live in. And I'm going to tell you why in just a second. But for now, I want to tell you that Tribe is the UK's leading all-natural sports nutrition brand. It provides a range of over 20 natural energy and recovery products. The founders, Tom, Rob and Guy, started Tribe in 2015 after a 1,000-mile run across Eastern Europe. They were frustrated with the synthetic sports nutrition on this and other adventures, so they created a market-leading range of natural energy bars, protein shakes, and hydration products for everyday athletes. Tribe has been listed in Marketing Weekly's 100 Most Innovative Companies and has over 20,000 athletes take part in its community events. Through the Tribe Freedom Foundation, its charity has raised over £200,000 to fight human trafficking. Pretty impressive, and just something that is just such a good cause that we need to bring more awareness to. It is a great product for performance nutrition. It is vegan, gluten, dairy-free, 100% natural ingredients tailored to your training. They are all ingredients you know and love. And if you use promo code TINAMUIR, that's TINAMUIR, you can claim a £2 first box when you subscribe to Tribe. Head over to wearetribe.co/TinaMuir to claim your offer. That's use code TINAMUIR, TINAMUIR, to claim a £2 first box when you subscribe to Tribe. Head to wearetribe.co/TinaMuir to claim your offer.
If we were to know close to everything, then we'd be actually the most depressed and needing to act. But I think we can lull ourselves into complacency by just, I had a great run today. It was beautiful weather. Like, my life is so good. I love running. I'm so fortunate. A lot of people just end it at that. Or maybe they'll say, I do trail work every once in a while. I don't litter. I dig holes when I poop outside, etc. But we need to be taking it to that next step of, okay, who's representing me in this crazy government, and how am I being a part of that? And what orgs am I contributing to that are making sure these politicians are doing their job to protect me, to protect my kids, etc. Yeah.
And so what if you were talking to someone who was from a state like, I don't know, Kentucky, where things are maybe not kind of moving along with the people in charge, and maybe someone listening, like I said, I can't vote, so I can't do the biggest one of all, but people are trying to vote, but nothing is changing. It's the same old thing going around again. What would you suggest to someone in one of those states that isn't an Oregon, a Colorado, a California, that kind of has the momentum already going?
Yeah, I would say basically the same thing I just said. The key is educating ourselves, because Colorado is actually a very purple state, if you want to talk party lines. And it's transitioned in the past 10 years to being more progressive as more diversity comes in. And frankly, movements have just taken off. And specifically in Kentucky, there's a movement was born out of climate change issues called the Sunrise Movement. And so it's youth around the U.S. and youth and non-youth who are trying to get politicians in the House of Representatives and in Senate to support the Green New Deal.
So that was Alexandra. Yeah, I watched that documentary on Netflix about her. Mm-hmm.
Oh, nice. Oh, gosh. Yeah, I really want to watch that. But so Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez and Senator Jeff Merkley from Massachusetts introduced this resolution, the Green New Deal, to transition the U.S. to 100% renewable energy economy. But why Kentucky is interesting is...
Yeah, I did wonder that.
Yeah, the current Senate Majority Leader is Mitch McConnell, and he is a senator from Kentucky. And the Sunrise Movement is born out of addressing the fact that Mitch McConnell is ignorantly and amorally denying the need to do something about climate change. And so all these youth basically have been protesting at his office for the past year. And there's been a lot of movements in Kentucky, and that's spread to all over the U.S. of, hey, here's this guy who's running the U.S. Senate, basically, or he's, the majority leader, and he won't have hearings on climate change. Like, what? And so, people are sending postcards and whatnot. So if you live in Kentucky or anywhere, Google Sunrise Movement, and they're working hand in hand alongside orgs like Protect Our Winners. So that's what I mean. If people feel lost or like, oh, I'm from like the super reddest state of them all. It's like, no, there's amazing, smart, progressive people everywhere. And you don't, and I'm not saying like that they're all Democrats, right? I want to make it clear that you can be of any like political orientation or something and still really care about climate change.
Okay. So what about for someone, you just said that education, educating yourself, educating others. What would be your advice? Because I'm sure you've come into this quite a lot on talking to someone who maybe it's a family member who is older, or maybe they just have no interest, who is absolutely not interested in having this conversation, will shut you down, tell you that you're being fed lies. What is your advice for kind of tackling it without kind of it just ending in both parties being like fine and walking off in different directions? So what would be your advice there?
With no progress. Well, thankfully stats are on the side of a better world where renewable energy is cheaper than fossil fuel energy today. That is a fact in the U.S. that wind, onshore wind and solar energy per kilowatt hour is cheaper than coal today. And yes, that is because we do have subsidies in the government, but the government's also subsidizing fossil fuels as we speak. So it's an economic discussion. It doesn't have to be one of, it's weird to me, though, that people... I get it. I have these conversations a lot where people are like, no, climate change isn't real. And it's like, do you like being outside? Do you want to have breathable air? But assuming that conversation goes nowhere, then you talk economics. And all it takes, again, is a little bit of time of honing in on some sources to give to people. And I mean, there's literally millions out there. This is why the internet's amazing, is because you can get scientific papers, or you can get news articles that have boiled down scientific papers to a layperson's understanding. And we just need people to read, basically.
So give us some more resources. You mentioned Sunrise Project, you mentioned POW. What else? Give us some other links that I can put in the show notes for people.
Yeah, so another good, specific to climate change and environment, GRIST, GRIST, is a news source that focus specifically on environmental stories. I also recommend people to find out who their senators are, who their representative is, and to find them. If you use social media, you should be following your senators and your representative, because I've found, if that's a way to sort of remind yourselves that you live in a democracy, and you can see that there are humans representing you. And, if people are wasting their time scrolling anyways, you might as well make it useful and follow news sources. Other things. I mean, I keep an eye on New York Times, like climate news. I keep an eye on the different departments: Department of Interior, Department of Agriculture, the Environmental Protection Agency. It sounds boring, but it's really not, because it's like the world and our land. Mm-hmm. And if we like running, we should care about this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to mention one more that Sally, one of my Patreon members, said about the League of Conservation Voters website.
Oh, yeah. Nice. Go, Sally. That is an awesome source. Yes.
So that is where you can see where politicians stand on environmental issues. So if it's
right, you can see a scorecard of basically every environmental bill that they've voted on and how they've voted. And that will really elucidate even, someone you think might be like, oh, yeah, the senator rocks. And it's like, oh, wait, no, they've been like voting against public lands for the last 6 years.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk a bit about you. For someone listening who is thinking, well, it's all very well and good you saying all this stuff, and you saying one flight doesn't make a difference. But in the meantime, this is taking a really long time. We can only vote every 4 years or 2 years, of parts of it. But either way, it's going to take a long time to make a change. In the meantime, we're all just constantly adding to the problem and making things worse. You being one of them, taking planes all over the world. Mm-hmm. You've been asked this question a ton before. What would you like to say back to someone who's thinking, I'm obviously not thinking this, but like, don't be a hypocrite.
For sure. And first off, I'm not a hypocrite because I don't deny that me being on a plane emits carbon. I fully will, I'll shout it from the rooftops. And this plane issue is twofold. One, I don't believe in perfection should get in the way over progress. But two, I have made steps to reduce my personal flights. So I'm trying my hardest actually to not race in Europe this year, because I raced in Europe, I think, one too many times last year. And I wasn't psyched when I calculated my total metric tons. At the end of the year, I do it every year. And I donate, what was it, like $115 per metric ton of carbon, which is like the absolute highest.
And who do you donate to? The Project Winters, Protect Our Winters?
Protect Our Winters. But I donated to Protect Our Winters, but this year the Solutions Project is also another org working on climate change advocacy. And then I'm actually saving half of that for 2020 elections, because I feel so strongly about making sure we get the right people in office. And there's a very intense senator race in Colorado. And I really think it's disgusting how much money goes into these political races. But, again, I would be a hypocrite if I didn't, walk that talk. And that's what I believe can work.
Okay. And then what about your sponsors or packaging? Have you been encouraging your brands to use eco-friendly products? And what do you do with, the extra waste that you're bringing out because of the products you're using for your running?
Yeah. Well, the biggest thing is I actually landed the dream sponsorship of Patagonia.
Yes,
and
you did.
and that's not to say that other brands aren't doing good things for the environment, but I will say every single brand who makes any outdoor gear should be basically copying what Patagonia is doing, because I see it in their materials department. They're not using virgin materials to make our gear anymore.
What do you mean by virgin materials for someone who doesn't know what that means?
Yeah, a virgin material is just like a brand new roll of polyester, or brand new like giant fabric roll of nylon that comprises our running shorts or our jackets or our shirts. And those products, polyester and nylon, come from petroleum, which is oil and non-renewable resource. And the reality is we can make all of that from recycled polyester and nylon, which is what Patagonia has been doing and they've transitioned to that. Same with cotton. Patagonia switched to organic cotton in the 90s.
What does that mean, organic cotton?
Organic cotton doesn't use fertilizers or pesticides in the growing of the cotton. And conventional cotton has is one of the worst things we can grow on planet Earth because of the amount of fertilizers and pesticides used in these crops that are like super in bed with big companies like Monsanto. And so, the specific cotton form requires a specific fertilizer pesticide, and it's been proven to cause myriad cancers in workers who work on these farms and fields, many of whom are don't have insurance and let alone like basic healthcare if you look in other countries around the world. And the runoff from these fertilizers and pesticides contribute to algal blooms. So in the Gulf of Mexico, like why we see coral declining and fish populations declining in the Gulf of Mexico is largely from the use of fertilizers and pesticides in the Corn Belt, like Iowa, across like the Midwest in the US, and rain runoff essentially takes those fertilizers and pesticides and it gets spit out into the Gulf of Mexico, creating, full ecosystem basically collapse. And yet, we as consumers are contributing to that every time we buy a shirt that's just basic cotton. And I didn't realize that until like 15 months ago when I started reading the literature that Patagonia is putting out, it's on their website. And I actually was running for the North Face before Patagonia. And there's amazing people at the North Face. I love the athletes, but big brands like the North Face aren't doing their job in cleaning up their supply chains, and they know better. Every single brand. And it's so frustrating to me that the outdoor industry alone, which doesn't even come close to like fast fashion or high fashion industries, that if we can't even clean up our own supply chains, it's embarrassing. Mm-hmm. And I see what Patagonia is doing. And there are, again, other brands who are making waves in certain areas, and some brands will have one line of shirts that's made from recycled polyester, and they'll say, oh, it's from plastic bottles, and that's great. But what is the other 99% of your line made out of? Because that's what matters. You look like at Adidas that has the Parlay line. Like, that's great. But Adidas, you make way, way, way more clothes than Patagonia ever does. And how is the rest of your line made?
Can you give us some other brands along the way that are, maybe you mentioned Adidas have one line, but any other brands that are kind of you have come to your attention in the running world that are doing the right thing?
Ininji is a really small brand that
Ininji?
Yeah. Is that how you say
Janji?
it? Ininji? Janji. Gosh.
Yes.
Janji. And they've been pretty on it with giving back to the places that they're making their products. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's cool. But, they probably make, such a fraction of products in the grand scheme of things. So as consumers, I encourage us to actually look at the tag, and when we go to races and we get shirts, say no. Like, you don't need another POS, virgin polyester running shirt, or tell the race director, hey, I would love the option to not buy that shirt.
Some races do give you that now where you can decline the shirt. I've seen that.
Which is great. Yeah. And I encourage, races that's our community and where we gather as runners. And so I think there's a big opportunity for race directors to do that extra research and of if I am going to give all this swag, I should be really thoughtful about what I'm purchasing and just less junk. You said it really well, Tina. We need to be reducing first and foremost. Yeah.
What about fueling products for you?
Yeah, I'm sponsored by Honey Stinger, and I have looked in depth into where they get their honey. They actually have the most organic honey of any fueling products out there. And honey is a whole, we could have 10 podcasts on honey in general, but essentially to have organic honey, you need to get it from an island today. And they get theirs off the coast of Brazil. And so, yes, there's carbon involved with sourcing that honey, but that's because in the US or in any big continent, the amount of fertilizers and pesticides used is so grand and insidious and ubiquitous that bees are going to be eating chemicals, pretty much like guaranteed. Or you can get small source honey. Like my dad keeps bees in his backyard in Englewood, Colorado, and that, you know, might be able to be classified as organic, depending on where the bees are going. But so yeah, I feel like what Honey Stinger is doing is good. They're trying to help prevent full-scale colony collapse disorder amongst bee populations, which is very important for all of our food. But you know, that took like 6 months of sort of reading back and forth, asking questions.
This was you doing that with them?
Yeah. And just me like reading on my own and seeing, seeing what my dad was doing. Like he basically read about colony collapse disorder and realized, oh, I should get hives in my backyard. And you know, now he has this amazing beekeeping hobby, and it's awesome. And so, you know, most of this research has basically brought me back to the land and simplified. And like these conversations are really fun to have because like who doesn't like being outside in a really vibrant garden that doesn't have pesticides or a vibrant farm? And that's sort of the last thing. This is also something Patagonia has just been writing checks for because they feel so strongly about it being the future. And it's called regenerative organic agriculture. And what that means is it's organic agriculture, but with a focus on soil health. So today, all of our conventional crops have the shittiest soil you can find. Like, because we use monoculture so heavily, the soil doesn't have these rich microbiomes and nutrients and bugs. And that's what makes healthy food. It's what makes tasty food. And it also sequesters a ton of carbon when you have really healthy soil. So essentially, if farmers were to go back to the way they did things before the Industrial Revolution, the world would be able to be carbon neutral. And that's been proven by like modeling estimations. If all of conventional agriculture switched back to regenerative organic agriculture, so you get rid of the fertilizers, you get rid of the big tilling machinery, you employ a lot more people in the process, we would have a carbon neutral world because that soil sequesters so much carbon.
So what, you know, as individuals listening to this,
yeah. You're like, okay.
You know, no. This is related, I promise. So, you know, maybe someone's thinking, okay, until that happens, shopping at my local farmer's market. I know that's coming from a local farmer who I can get, you know, they have it at their local farm. Is that a good solution in the meantime for food specifically?
100%.
Okay.
Shopping locally and having a conversation with a farmer, just ask them, or someone at a stand. If you're fortunate enough to have a farmer's market in your area, be like, hey, so, you know, what do you use? Do you use fertilizers and pesticides? And those farmers, they want to connect with people who are buying their products. I was just touring a farm in Boulder, and it's like farmers love knowing who's buying their products and educating them on how they're growing this, you know, painstaking, beautiful, like miracle process of growing food. And at the grocery store, it's a lot more expensive, but buying organic is what I've chosen to start doing. And even though the organic certification process in the US is pretty messed up, and a lot of things could have the label and not be organic.
Like organic Gatorade, which is now, have you ever seen that?
Oh no!
No, I'm not kidding. There's literally a Gatorade that says organic Gatorade, which I just saw that and I thought, oh dear, that's how far we've fallen. But I just want to mention on that note, for someone listening who's thinking organic is really expensive, and yes, it does require more money up front. And I want you to explain, Claire, why we need, you know, what the problem is, even though it should be obvious with taking in pesticides, even if you know, someone says, I wash my fruit. But I just want to mention quickly for someone, most cities, or a lot of cities, and hopefully some places, have some kind of farm share program. I know that, you know, Lexington isn't the biggest city, but we have multiple farm share programs. Some of them are organic farms. And just like Claire mentioned, when we would get our CSA, the owners would send a little letter with what they'd been doing, what seeds were going in. And it just felt like you said, they wanted to share with their customers. And so you can find something like that, and it feels good that you're giving your money to an individual family to help them with their livelihood. So I just want to mention that might be a cheaper option. Obviously it's still going to be more expensive than buying canned and frozen fruit and vegetables from a store, but that your money is going in the right place, and it's all kind of part of this movement that is pulling it away from the bigger companies who are just kind of like squashing everything else. So, but on that note, Claire, we mentioned about pesticides. It should be obvious, but if someone is saying, I don't have the money to be able to buy organic, what pitch would you like to make to say, I get that this is a lot of money. I get that this might mean sacrificing something else, but this is why it's so important.
Well, food is the most important thing in our lives, right? And you look at other countries or cultures not in the US and in Europe, I think it's the average European spends 50% of their income on food. And in the US, I think it's less than 30 or maybe even less than 25%. And so why is that? Why are we afraid to spend money on the thing that matters most? And I'll be honest, I used to be super, super cheap. Like I was raised very frugally. And I used to, get in arguments with my friends over, shared meals. Like, why do we have to buy the nice stuff? Like, that's stupid. And I've had this full transition in the last few years of, I care about my health, honestly, more than anything. Like, I'm a selfish human, or I guess maybe I care about the earth's health a little bit more. But and so what I'm putting into my body should take precedence over, like anything else you could find important to buy. And when you think holistically of what you're doing by buying good food, and you think of that's how you're interacting with this planet, with your ecosystem, with the environment, and we're healthier for it. I really would love to not get some like crazy form of cancer that could be linked back to fertilizers or pesticides. And that's happening today. So yeah, and I think everyone will find their own journey of what they deem is best to put in their bodies and what works with their budget. But yeah, the community share. What does CSA stand for again? Community share agriculture, I think.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm not 100% sure. I've just always called it CSA.
I know. It's just CSA. Is a great thing to look into, especially if you don't travel much, because you can get consistent veggies. Or if you do eat meat, that's like one of the best ways to get really healthy, sustainable meat.
Yeah. And it tastes better too. Like I can always taste when I have had meat that hasn't come from the farm that I'm used to having, or one of the local farms. Like you can just tell. And eggs too. Eggs, when people have eggs, they should be this nice, beautiful, bright, yellow, like deep yellow color, not very pale. Like you can really tell, not just in taste, but in the way that it looks. Like beef, you can tell when it's not, the beef is, not doing so well when it's really kind of pale in color, whereas the local beef is always really a deep red color. Sorry, that's probably gross for you as a vegetarian, but you can always find it, and a lot of stores, even if you can't go to a local farmer, if you go to Whole Foods, they have numbers on their meat and fish that say whether they're rated green, yellow, how sustainable they are. They give numbers, so there are ways of doing it. And on that note, just to kind of finish up here with this topic, as much as I wish I could talk to you about this all day. What about us as individuals in the meantime, while we're waiting for these changes to happen, while waiting to vote, walking places instead of driving, recycling, choosing earth-friendly products, reusable grocery bags. Do we as individuals, does that actually make a difference? All those kind of little things.
it depends on the thing for sure. And, people write dissertations on plastic grocery bags. So, but on the whole, yes. And the question we should be asking ourselves is like, do I care? Am I like a caring member of human Earth, or human, wow, planet Earth? Am I a caring human of planet Earth? Yeah. Little anthropocentric. Yeah. And yes, we're not, I'm not perfect. I sometimes forget my grocery bags, but like 99% of the time I don't. And I've just noticed, talking to people who've transitioned to commuting more via bike or bus, how much happier it makes people. I know myself for sure, if I can plan out my day, which I do now, to commute to like downtown Boulder, because I kind of live on the outskirts of Boulder, by biking. It takes 25 minutes versus a 10-minute drive. Like, I actually am a happier person. I'm happier. I'm healthier. I'm doing less harm, and like life is good. If I'm slowing down enough to put in those 15 extra minutes in my day to get downtown via bike. And I've found I just feel more in tune with like life by thinking more holistically about how I'm moving in the world, how I'm getting to places. I always take the bus to the airport, always, even though it takes a little bit more time. When I travel, I'm always using Google Earth incessantly of how I can use public transportation. And then, I'm learning at the same time, like, oh, this town has amazing public transportation, or this doesn't. And in the US, it's definitely the worst in most of the places I've been around the world. And so again, that goes back to, how are we voting? Like, I really want to vote for people who are thinking about public transportation in a useful way, so we can not rely on our gas guzzling cars. And yeah, if you have to buy a car, honestly, it makes more economic sense to buy an electric vehicle today, assuming that you can find a car that fits your needs that's electric. There's so many subsidies right now. And I had to get a new car last year, and I couldn't afford an electric car, even with the subsidies. So I got an '08 Prius, so an old Prius, and I like never buy gas. So little things like that, they'll end up making a difference.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for explaining that. And I will say to the listeners, I'm just finishing up a article I'm writing just for little things you can do kind of on that note, to at least, feel like you're doing something to help. And the thing is with everything Claire and I have talked about today, we've mentioned about educating family and friends, talking about things like this to people who maybe don't know any better. But a lot of it is people seeing you doing things, if they see you taking in, like I have these, when I go to the store, I have not just the reusable grocery bags, which I recommend for people, put them in your car. Like, people always leave them in the house thinking they'll grab them on the way out. You always forget. So just leave it in your car. But I have these little fruit and vegetable ones. They're reusable. They've got like different colored, and people, I see people looking at them and thinking, I can see them thinking, wow, that's cool. Or, and so I'm hoping that then they go home and kind of Google reusable produce bags or something, like, so you doing things, other people see you doing that, and then they will think, that's a good idea. So you never know how much leading by example might help. And you as one person might think, well, I don't have anyone in my life who will follow me, but maybe you will. Maybe they're in the supermarket. Maybe they see you walking along the road and think, oh, it is a nice day outside. I'm going to go for a walk too. Or I'm going to walk to the grocery store, whatever it may be. So never forget how much of an impact you're making by just doing these things yourself. So hopefully that helps. Claire, anything else before we get to these final questions? Just the quick ones that you would like to say to our listeners, just about the environment, about climate change, just kind of really bring this point home.
Yeah, I think, and now people might be like, roll their eyes at this, but just being in tune to the earth and our surroundings on every run is such a privilege, right? We get to go outside, and most of us are fortunate enough. We breathe clean air. Well, it's getting worse, but we get to touch dirt. We get to run, and what are we going to do with that privilege? And I hope, and I found that positivity has to take a forefront. Like, we have to be positive and optimistic about this. We have to love each other, love ourselves, put less into our bodies, into the earth. And that general mindset has made me a happier person. It's made me a better runner, a healthier person. And it's been basically a journey, mainly in the last few years, when I've really started to take this education piece seriously. So, the more we can dive in, but at the same time, stay positive is really key.
I do think people listening, you will find that once you start reading about this stuff, once you start listening to podcasts, once you start learning about it, you get obsessed with it and you can't stop thinking about it. And every decision you make, you start thinking about it. I will be having plenty of show notes, plenty of links in the show notes to things Claire and I have mentioned, in addition to some movies you should see, some things you should watch. I have written in my notes here that Uninhabitable Earth, Life After Warming. Did you mention that to me once before?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and you heard the author on Joe Rogan, right?
Oh, that was it. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
so I'll put a link to the podcast with David Wallace Wells on Joe Rogan's podcast. And then that's his, how's that related?
That's his book, The Uninhabitable
That's his
Earth.
book. Okay. So that's
exactly.
David Wallace Wells' book. And I will put a link to that as well. Okay. I just saw that there and I was like, I don't know what I wrote that for.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I had just been to Ventura, I think the last time we talked, and Patagonia's headquarters, and Yvonne Chouinard, founder of Patagonia, had just read the book and finished it. And I was like, Yvonne, how's it going? He's like, not good. Good.
Yeah.
He's like, you got to read this book. And he bought a bunch of copies for everyone to share at the office. So pretty much anything Yvonne tells me to read, I read.
Well, and I also think, have you read the book Sapiens?
It's on my list.
Oh, yeah. I have it. It's ridiculously long. I have it on Audible, and I want to say it's like 16 hours long. Like, it's insanely long. But like, you talked about zooming out with your initial perspective at the beginning of the interview, and that was just blew my mind, zooming out when you realize, how quickly we are destroying this world. So I will put lots of links for everyone listening. I just want to get to these final 4 questions just quickly. Starting with one piece of advice you would like to give the listeners for life. This doesn't have to be about the environment. It could be about anything.
I guess kind of what okay. Now, the number one piece of advice is to keep on exploring new trails.
I like that.
And with that, I think people will, the more we see new things, put more information into our brains, more experiences running, then we'll have more tools to make smarter decisions, like when it comes to the voting booth. Yeah. Great.
Thank you. All right. Other than Patagonia, which would probably have been your answer, one person or brand to follow on social media and why?
I'd say Protect Our Winners.
Okay. They have a social media account on all the.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. How do you want to be remembered on this show?
Well, I'm very flattered again to be on it. I guess, I want to be remembered as actually trying to do something about the earth.
And you definitely are. What about a running for real moment, something that only runners will understand that has happened to you?
I experienced, like all of us, super hard lows in races. Like, if I'm racing to my absolute best, I will have bonks so hard. Like, I just did this 21 miler in Idaho a few days ago, Scout Mountain Ultras. It was amazing. And at mile 3, I kid you not, I was like, oh no, I'm done. Like, I don't know if I'm going to finish this race. And then I shoved 2 gels into my mouth, because that's what, we always should do when we're bonking. But it was mile 3. Like,
yes.
And lo and behold, I kept chugging away, and I somehow got the course record even. And so it just shows how you can turn things around. But I go into dark holes, just like the rest of us.
Yeah, we definitely do. Well, thank you for being honest and sharing that. All right, Claire, where can people find more about you, follow along with you in the future?
I have a blog with the hilarious handle of or URL clare.run. And then I'm most active on Instagram.
And it's
Clare Gallagher runs.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, yeah. Runs as well. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Claire, thank you so much for educating us today, for, helping us, for being a positive role model, for fighting for this beautiful world that we live in. We appreciate all that you do. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tina. Go Earth.
My friends, if you have a minute and you could leave a review on your favorite podcast player, Apple Podcasts, aka iTunes, Stitcher, Overcast, Pocket Cast, Spotify, or whatever else podcast player you use to listen to this podcast, or if you would subscribe to this podcast, you will help me get out in front of new runners to make our tribe even bigger and even better. It might not seem like you as one person can make a difference, but really it helps a lot. And it shows me you appreciate the hard work I put in for those. Thank you so much. I know it can feel a bit like a broken record when we keep talking about this. And I know in particular I keep talking about this, but friends, this is so important. This is literally our livelihood, our children's livelihood. And I know that I seem like I'm talking about this a lot, but it is really important, not just to me, but to you and everyone on this earth. We really need to take care of this world. And I hope this episode has kind of reminded you of that and given you some ideas on thinking what you can do to get involved within your local area and support brands like Patagonia and Janji. She mentioned Janji. That's another great one. And I'm hoping that some of the others are going to start following suits in the coming months when it comes to running specific products. But in the meantime, as Claire mentioned, it is about the administration and what we can change here. So really do your best to read up on it, educate yourself on it. And it is really interesting, in addition to being quite scary, to be totally honest, but it's worth looking at and learning about. So thank you so much for tuning in today. And if you could share this episode, this one more than any others means so much to me. And also after this episode probably kind of explains to you my obsession with Leonardo DiCaprio, because this is what he is also obsessed with. But I hope you enjoyed this episode. And if there's anyone that you think could listen to this episode and would be open-minded, please share it on. I would really appreciate that. Now, next week, you are going to be hearing from the one and only Greg McMillan. He is one of the best-known coaches in the US and has done really well with all kinds of levels, from recreational runner to the elite runner. And he is the guy behind that running calculator that most of us love so much. And I'm sure you're going to want to hear the story behind that and just how accurate that actually is. So be sure to go subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you so much for listening today. Go check out all the links in the show notes, or I can email them to you. Just send me an email, tina@tinamuir.com, and I'll send you the show notes every Friday through email if you prefer. Thanks for listening. Have a great week.
Thanks for listening to the Running for Real podcast. Be sure to check out tinamuir.com for show notes and even more helpful running information.